good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Brainy Boomer Lecture Series. We're also very happy that you joined us today. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the McGill University Research Center for Studies in Aging is located and our work is done on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganyankahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, commonly known as Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many Indigenous peoples. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples we serve within the Montreal community. In 2007, the McGill University Research Center for Studies in Aging, or the MCSH Education Committee, started the Brainy Boomer Lecture Series in order to suggest practical steps to both improve and maintain brain health, as well as to promote healthy lifestyle choices amongst the most populous generation in history. The MCSH Education Committee, which was founded in 1996, has three main objectives: identifying education needs of healthcare providers, seniors, caregivers, and the public, and to develop responses to meet some of their needs; to enhance the positive image of the aging process by addressing stereotypes and myths about aging; and finally, the dissemination of research on aging. Our guest today is Dr. Siegfried Hakimi, who was originally from Geneva, Switzerland, and obtained his undergraduate degrees in biology at the University of Geneva. He then pursued a successful career as a professional cyclist, competing in races such as Tour de France, the Giro d'Italia, and numerous world championships. After this pleasant interval, he obtained his PhD, still in Geneva, and then moved to the famed Laboratory of Molecular Biology, or the LMB, of the Medical Research Council in Cambridge, UK, as a postdoctoral fellow. It is at the LMB where he developed his interest for the biology of aging. In 1992, he joined McGill University, where he has been a full professor since 2004. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, the RSC, since 2010, and was awarded the RFC's Flavel Medal for outstanding contributions to biological sciences. Before continuing, we would like to remind you to please mute your microphone on Zoom, and that if you have any questions, you can either write them down in the chat box, or you could wait until the end of the conference to ask them. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Hakimi to start his presentation.
Thank you for the introduction. It's really fun to actually do this. I tried to make my talk both accessible and maybe be a bit different than other talks you might have heard. I will start with a little repeat of the introduction I just got, because I think it allows me to make a few points. I'm a professor at McGill for 30 years now, and I'm now 65. And I hope that I will be able to run my lab for many more years to come. And we will speak a little about why I think I can expect to do that. Mind you, I'm also very glad that there is no mandatory retirement for professors in Quebec, in contrast to Switzerland, where at 65 you have to retire. This is kind of a sad thing. What you're seeing on your screen is the web page of my laboratory, and it also again allows me to make a few points. One is that beards for older gents are in fashion again, more than it used to be when I was young, when it was quite a rare thing. The other thing, what we see here is two of the animal models we are using to study aging. Of course, you recognize mice here, but an important animal for us has been the nematode roundworm, Caenorhabditis elegans, which of course it does not have this size. It's a microscopic worm, which is only 1 millimeter long, and it allows us to study aging because we can study great numbers of them because they're so small, and also because they not live very long. They live just a few weeks. We also work with human cells, and we also do drug discovery to intervene on the aging process, but I'll say more about that later. Here, you might not be familiar, but these are all examples of prestigious publication where we managed to publish some of our work. And the point I'm trying to make here is this might be because we are good scientists, but also because I was one of the very first to use the new approach to study aging and health, which is to look at mutants in different animal species that are long-lived. There's a genetic approach to aging, meaning looking at mutants which succeed to live much longer than the normal or so-called wild-type animals. And this was a new approach. And so we were at the very beginning of that field. And this, of course, gives you a bit of long-term prestige. Today I will not try to give you advice, health advice, but rather I will try to tell you about how basic research on aging, health, and longevity can actually inform our thinking about what we should do and not do in our lives. But you will see that maybe one of the conclusions we can have from what I will tell you today is that when somebody tells you that a particular treatment is a cure for aging or even slows down aging, you should maybe not trust that. It's very unlikely that they actually have such a thing. All right. So again, to go back to the introduction, I try to make a point here, even if this appears to be a little digression. Before becoming a scientist, as Kathleen was saying, I was a professional cyclist, and I participated in all the big races. My girth here was much slimmer than now, and some of these races I even succeeded in winning, which was not easy, neither at the time nor is it now. But except for bragging rights, I show these pictures to illustrate a couple of points. Lifestyle might matter for how long you can survive or how quickly you age. I, for one, have never stopped doing a lot of intense exercise, and I'm in great shape. On the other hand, it has been very difficult scientifically to demonstrate that exercise is actually good for you, especially how much exercise is good for you. There is no clear, there's no completely clear vision of that, how much one should tell people to exercise, or whether really, in fact, we can demonstrate that doing exercise is helping people to maybe age more slowly. And so when people do exercise, one thinks, well, that is good for them, and you see maybe people will do exercise a little bit longer, etc. But there might be an alternative explanation, which is that when you do exercise or even competition when you're young and you're successful at it, you learn to enjoy exercise and you do exercise for the rest of your life. But what then might promote your health is not actually having done all that exercise. It's more like those people who enjoy exercise or have been good at high intensity exercise, like in competition when they were young, just do have a physiology that allows them to age more slowly. And this robust physiology is the one which allows them to be good at sports. But it's the same characteristics which allows them to age more slowly, rather than they've been doing a lot of exercise and this helps them. So it's hard to disentangle these two types of explanation. And this applies to other things than aging. It applies to some other characteristic of health. It's hard to tell whether what you have been doing during your life was good or bad for you, or whether you are, from the start, the person who was going to do these things. Yeah, let's say a lot of exercise because you enjoy it. And you're capable of doing it because you're healthy. Okay. The next slide here shows me again here at age 60 on top of Mount Kilimanjaro. See, 5,895 meters over sea level. Okay. And this was a great trip, which was a gift from my wife for my 60th birthday. And I was, of course, very happy to be able to find out that I'm still able to climb to 6,000 meters, where it's only about half the level of oxygen, and yeah, I'm doing fine. However, you might notice that the other participant in the trip here have a very different age. You immediately see that they are much younger. Okay. And the point I'm trying to make is that you immediately recognize the age, both in the features and in their body posture, movements, compared to me sitting there doing fine, but you know. And the point is, and this is to point to the fact that performance, say the ability to climb up there, or what I showed you earlier about being a strong sportsman when you're young, is not the only marker of biological age. Okay, in that sense, there are biomarkers, markers in people of the rate at which they age. Because, for example, looking young is something that really only very young people are capable of doing. Nobody is actually old and unhealthy and looks young. And this probably means that when people look young for their age, it's actually a sign that they're also physiologically young. Just like I was trying to tell you, the fact that I'm still climbing at age 60, capable of climbing to 6,000 meters is probably a sign, but measured by performance, that many of the things which make up my body still function well. But when you're young and you look young, this too is not really possible unless you are physiologically, you are biologically still young. So if you look young for your age, it's a good sign that you have a better chance to live longer maybe than others. Also, one has always to remember, it's always true in biology, that this is statistic. It's never a law for one particular individual, but I would say on average, people who still look young for their age probably have a relatively slow rate of aging and therefore have a greater chance to reach a high age. Of course, not all relevant important physiological characteristics can be measured as sporting performance or even looks. And this gets me to the next slide, which is a scientific study which has been conducted quite a few years ago by my friend Tom Pearls. So let me explain. I like this study for the logic of it and how this study, this sort of logic can be applied to many different things to understand human aging. So the way they did the study is the following. They identified centenarians, so women, this is all about women who made it to 100 years. And then they identified women who died at the age of 73, but were otherwise equivalent. They lived in the same, region. This was all the northeast of the US. They lived in the same region. They have similar social, professional situations. They had whatever they could find about these people. They tried to find people who were really equivalent to the centenarians. And then they asked a single question. So the people were identified before asking that question. And they wondered which of these people had a child after the age of 35 years and who had a child after the age of 40. We can look at this, it's simpler to look at. So you can see that many more of the women who afterwards reached the age of 100 actually had a child after the age of 40. which suggests that these women were still fertile and capable of carrying a child after the age of 30. Many more of those who made it to 100, also this was 30 years earlier, were capable of having a child after the age of 30, suggesting that these women were indeed physiologically younger when they were 40. And that is why they reached 100 years. It's because they were already aging more slowly by this measure of being capable of having a child after the age of 40. And it's maybe particularly striking knowing that the number of children you have for women is not really linked to lifespan very much. It has a very small effect on your lifespan. People have few or many children. So it's not that, it's to be able to have one after a certain age, for which you need health in general and reproductive health in particular. So these women likely were physiologically young at age 40, and it's those that made it to 100. Okay, now I'd like to discuss a different point about aging and age-dependent diseases, the diseases that arise when you get older. There's two models which we really do not fully know which one is right, although you'll see there's reason to believe the lower one is right. One is that what we call aging is just a collection of individual processes, individual features of our bodies that go wrong with time. Okay, and I listed just a few, didn't try to be exhaustive: cancer, heart disease, neurodegenerative diseases, osteoporosis, diabetes, others. And they all sort of are independent. I mean, a very clumsy analogy would be, you know, with age, your knees hurt, and with age, your skin is not what it used to be. And it could be that it's wear and tear on your knees from walking, and wear and tear on your skin through, you know, sunlight and frostbite. And in completely independent processes, these two things happen. That's one of the way we could look at that. Alternatively, there could be an underlying aging process, some basic properties of all your cells that deteriorate with time and that secondarily lead to age-dependent diseases. So you're aging, and that makes you susceptible to develop all these diseases. But what's actually happening is not an independent development of these diseases. It's you're getting old at a biological level you actually do not understand. And I come back to that later, showing you why we would believe some of these things are not. And it is this mysterious aging process that might be slower in some individual than in others, without presuming, you know, what makes it slower in some than others. It could be genetics, you know, and people used to believe that long life resides in families. It could be so-called developmental, meaning, you know, by chance almost, I think it's the right term, you are during your embryogenesis and fetal life, and as a small child, you were put together just right. And this allows you to function at a better level for the rest of your life. So in a way, you got lucky that it all worked out. It's very difficult to make a human being, so that somehow all this process of development worked out right, and then you're more robust forever. And then, of course, it could be the environment. So, for example, you know, people say on the island of Okinawa in Japan, there are very many centenarians. And they say it's because, you know, life is good on this island. And the temperature is stable, and people do a lot of light exercise because they work in the fields, and people live long. So the environment could also be important. But all these are just hypotheses as what could be determining the rate of aging, of which the diseases we suffer from are secondary consequences. Okay. So another aspect of the rate of aging, of the questions we ask about aging, is whether, this aging process I just told you can go more or less fast, apparently, has many causes or has a single cause. Okay, and many different causes have been proposed, but it's really one particular cause that has been proposed to be the only cause of aging. Okay, so some people propose there are many different ones, they would collaborate, etc. But the so-called oxidative stress theory of aging has been proposed more than once and repeatedly for many years, for decades, as being maybe the cause of aging. It's like those so-called free radical cause of aging. You're damaged by free radicals which are made in your bodies, and that's why you're told sometimes by some to consume antioxidants and to eat vegetables which have antioxidants. Now, I do believe this is entirely wrong, but maybe, and today I won't treat the question of whether free radical damage is a cause or the cause of aging, but maybe at another talk, another year, I'd be happy to address that question. Today I don't have time, but that I just wanted to let you know this was one of the best proposed cause of aging. Here, other things we can recognize like mutations and so on, but I do not believe this is actually the single cause of aging. Okay. So I told you that we were amongst the first to investigate the question of aging by studying the genetic approach, by studying long-lived mutants. And to clarify, some points I'd like to make later, I would like to clarify some concepts about genetics and the genetics of aging. We know that children look like their parents, and this can last a while because this is me a long time ago, and this is my grandson, and I think we look alike. And it shows you that indeed genetic works mean that the characteristics you have, part of them are transmitted to your descendants. And you can recognize that in features or in many other things we can measure in people. And that's an important point. Another point is to actually age, you have to be alive. It seems trivial, but it means that it's the processes that make you alive that are responsible for making you aging. Why can I say that? It's because when we take, for example, the nematode worms I told you about, and we freeze them in liquid nitrogen at a very, very cold temperature, or dry plant seeds, or tardigrades, the little animals, microscopic animals, which can dry out completely as well. When they're in this condition, they're alive, but they're not living. They're not actually, no process occurs in them. And they're not aging. You can't freeze them and wake them up 50 years later, and they still are alive and will finish the life of just a few weeks. So there's this paradox that what makes you age is actually processes that are necessary for you to be alive. And of course, when I talk about processes, that means that they're genes whose function is to maintain these processes. On the other hand, we are also not, we're living quite a long time, actually, in the case of people. We're not just, nobody just falls dead, essentially, which means that there are also processes, and therefore gene, whose function is to keep you alive, okay, to prevent you from aging too quickly. Both you, the very fact to be alive makes you age, and yet you're also protected from not doing this too quickly. So that's why we can try to study some of this gene to understand something about what aging really is. As I told you, in terms of the genetic explanation, the idea that, you know, it runs in families, a difference between individuals. There's some who age slowly and others age more quickly, and this might have to do with the genes they carry from coming down from their ancestors. In the old days, you know, maybe a decade ago or even less, people thought that was relatively high. That was like 30% of the difference between people in terms of the rate of aging was due to genes. Nowadays, better studies, I think, have shown that this is very low. It's like 10% of the variation. So there is not much. Your rate of aging doesn't have a whole lot to do in terms of genes with the rate of aging of your ancestors, whether they were aging quickly or fast. So we have to find another explanation. The next slide is to show you just that, you know, this genetic approach to aging can use many different animal species to actually animal and not just animal species to try to investigate what's going on. And people use yeast, which are single cell organism, and just count how often they can divide before they stop dividing as a, you know, as a measure of aging. They use filamentous fungi. It's like some mold on your bread, you know, because some of these are aging, meaning that suddenly they stop growing. Nobody really knows why. They use fruit flies, and use the nematode roundworm, C. elegans, which is one of the organisms I've been working on. They use mice, of course. People make demographic study with people. And they also use other types of organisms here. That's a coelenterate hydra, which is like a sea anemone, but microscopic actually. And things which are very hard to study, which are deep sea fish. And one feature when people try to study all this great variety of species is that things that like hydra and maybe deep sea fish, organisms that grow, that never stop growing, might have different rate of aging or might actually not age. And organisms that have a fixed adult size, like we do, like flies or worms, mice do, they seem to be all aging by very similar biological processes. And what's interesting with that is means that we can probably study any of these organisms and learn something about human aging. Aging is probably the mechanism which makes species with a fixed adult size age are probably very, very similar from species to species. And this allows us to have a genetic approach, an experimental approach, without having to just look at the demographics of humans. And here I can show you a result of one such experiment, which I think is full of, tells us a lot. So here, this is so-called aging curve, okay, where we start with a cohort of worms, this microscopic 1 millimeter worms, cohorts of different, which carry different mutations. And here in black, you have the wild type. And then we look over time, and you can see the wild type dies in less than 20 days. All the animals in the initial cohort of maybe 100 or 150 animals all die very quickly. And we compare this in this experiment to, for example, this strain, which carries 2 mutations in DAF2 and CLK1, which lives a lot longer as a strain, right? It takes longer until all the animals are dead. That tells you a lot of things, because each animal in this group or each animal in that group is virtually identical. I mean, they're more identical to each other than monozygotic twins. They're completely the same in every respect, in terms of genetic and in terms of the biology we know about. Yet, some die very quickly, and some die 5 times later. Also, these animals are all the same in all the structures we know about. This is a sort of result that suggests that maybe development, quality of development, a bit of luck of how you development until you became an adult has proceeded is determining how long one particular individual lives, because these are all very identical for the sort of things we know. The other thing that's striking, and that is very important for our discussion of, rate of aging and whether there is a underlying aging process that's independently responsible for the various age-dependent diseases, is that these animals, which live so much longer than the wild type, are different from the wild type only in 2 parts per million. They have 2 mutations, 2 microscopic changes only, and yet they manage to live 5 times longer. So that is a sort of result which makes you believe that there must be sort of a thing like aging, the rate, an independent process which you can independently affect, because otherwise, how could you have a whole group of organisms that live so much longer, although it's virtually identical to another group of organisms that lives much shorter? It's hard to imagine how this tiny little change could affect a whole bunch of independent processes that are part of aging. However, if they can affect an underlying single process that for which all the other manifestations are real, then this might be true. So at the time when we had this result, we actually got the cover of Time magazine, which was pretty good. Because we had a big article inside about our results. So people were very much, it was the beginning of this field, but we were very much taken by the fact that we could obtain such incredible changes in lifespan in our model organism. And I would have liked to have my picture on it, but I think they chose a better model of youth than I would have been even at the time. I want to continue by making maybe one main last point, which is that it's a lot easier to wreck something than to make it better. And this applies to human health and human longevity. So let me explain this relatively old study, but again, which I chose not because it's a final word on it, but because the logic of it is interesting when we think about aging and health. So people studied a group of a particular religious group in California called the California Seventh-day Adventists. And they studied these people because they had found out that on average, these people lived a bit longer than the general Californian population. And it was known as well from these people that on average, as a group, they had rather healthy habits. They tended to be vegetarian, not meaning every individual was vegetarian, but on average, they tended to be vegetarian. They tended to be slim, have a low BMI. They tended to do exercise. They tended to be not smoking. And they also tended to eat nuts, which people associate with better health. And then the following question was asked. So the way they try to study this is the following. Let me try to explain. So what they did first, they look at those individuals who were average in doing these things. Those individuals which were at the midpoint of, they were not complete vegetarians, they still ate some meat, but they were had a baseline amount. They were average in this group. And they were average for the amount of exercise and nuts eating and weight and past smoking. And when you look at this average individual in this group of people, the Seventh-day Adventists, they made it to 85 years on average. And then this is a cumulative graph. And then they looked at people who were average for everything except for vegetarian status. So were average for everything, but also were particularly strict vegetarians, as opposed to those who were particularly non-strict vegetarian, meaning that they were not vegetarian at all. And you can see that being a particularly strict vegetarian when you are doing reasonable things for all other things doesn't really help you. However, to be not a vegetarian at all, to gorge on red meat all the time, seems to shorten your lifespan. And then you can add another level. So now as I looked at those which were strict vegetarian, average for most things, strict vegetarian, and doing a lot of exercise, and this didn't help them very much as well. They are very much like those who are just average for everything. However, those who did no exercise at all and ate a lot of red meat started to lose quite a bit of lifespan. And they did the same for nuts. Nuts actually seem to have a small beneficial effect by itself, but essentially you can still say that eating nuts, doing a lot of exercise, and being very strictly vegetarian is not much better than just being average for all these values. However, eating no nuts at all, doing no exercise at all, and eating only red meat starts to be cumulatively bad. And the same thing was true now for body weight, and the same is true for past smoking. What it means, something we kind of would know intuitively, is that if you're being reasonable about most things, you're doing just as well than when you are very strict about things that you think might be good. However, if you are very naughty about all these things, you actually can wreck things. So it's easy to damage your health, but it's not easy to make it better if you're reasonable in the first place. Okay, and I thought that is really interesting because it also tells you that once you have a reasonable lifestyle, to be getting very extreme for one of the things which might be good won't help you. However, to be misbehaving badly will actually probably contribute for poor health. So I'm reaching towards my last slides. I think we don't really know whether this is true. Aging is just a verbal construct, meaning all these things happen in parallel, or whether there's an aging process. But several things I showed you suggest there is such a thing as an aging process. We just don't know what it is. And that's what we're trying to find out. And many other laboratories are trying to find out what is this process that just gets worse with time. And because it's getting worse, it secondarily produces the various health problems. So what is this process? This process might be simple, might be complicated. It's stunning that we can affect it by affecting very, very few genes, suggests that it exists. But independent what the process is, I also asked the question, well, what can affect it? Is it genetics, means differences, some lucky mutation which you acquired from your ancestors? Is it development, meaning you got lucky, you got put together very well? Or is it the environment? And this gets me to my last slide, which is both optimistic, but also, I think, demonstrates that it must be the environment. This is life expectancy at birth in Canada in the last 100 years. And as you can see, the life expectancy has increased by 25 years in 100 years. And of course, and of course, this is just start in 1926, but this has happened in the last 300 years. This steady increase in the average life people reach. Okay, but how come this can increase? It's not medicine. We know that if you just cured all cancer, which is one of the causes of aging, certainly people will live a little longer. They will not live on average 25 years longer, okay? They would live on average a few years longer. So the fact that over time, and this is the whole population, those who have access to good healthcare, not so good healthcare, rich and poor and everything, this is everyone. And what it means is that if lifespan keeps increasing like that, the only thing I can see as being responsible for that is the environment. we are just living easier lives, okay, than our ancestors or people in the past. We work less hard on average. We, doing sport is not like hard work. It might be good for you, and hard work might not be good for you. We are not cold in the winter. We are not too hot in the summer. For example, in the heat waves in Europe in the last few years, people have seen that it actually made people unhealthy, these very hot summers. We have air conditioning, we have heating, we're working fewer hours, we're having fresh produce all year round. We are not, we're having drinkable water, we don't have to buy. We're having sewers in the streets. Everything that has to do with a controlled environment makes our life easier than when it used to be. And this, to me, is the only plausible explanation for this steady increase in lifespan. And you might notice that this doesn't seem to slow down. The increase continues, suggesting that maybe what causes aging is which is an old-fashioned concept people have sort of tried to move away from, but what causes aging is actually negative effects from the environment. And the fact that everybody keeps living longer, and this has been going on for 300 years and certainly very nicely in the last 100 years, very much suggests that. So this is both good news, a bit surprising, and it's also something we're trying to study in my laboratory. And now